Louisiana, May 8th, 1945. 11:47 in the morning. The loudspeaker crackled to life across Camp Ruston's compound, metal voice cutting through humid air thick with the smell of turned earth and southern pine. Static hissed, then words that would change everything. Germany has surrendered unconditionally. Margaret Brenner stood frozen in the vegetable garden, dirt caked under her fingernails, knees of her prison work trousers stained dark with Louisiana soil. 24 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, 112 pounds after 8 months of eating more food than she'd seen in the previous 3 years combined. Around her, the world erupted. American soldiers poured from barracks, voices rising in celebration, some crying, others laughing, most doing both at once. They'd won. Their war in Europe was over. Brothers and sons and husbands would come home now, or at least stop dying in French hedgerows and German forests. The German prisoners stood silent. 200 men in the main compound. 19 women near the garden plots, silent as graves. Some wept quietly. Others stared at nothing, faces empty, processing the end of everything they'd once believed in. Their nation had collapsed. Their armies had been crushed. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted exactly 12 years, and now it was ash and rubble and occupation. Greta's hand slipped into her trouser pocket. Her fingers found the wool gloves first. Thick Nebraska winter gloves, utterly useless in May Louisiana heat. She'd been carrying them every day since December, folded small, pressed against her hip. She couldn't say why. Couldn't explain the impulse that made her check for them each morning, making sure they were still there, still real. Her other hand found the compass, brass warm from her body heat, small enough to hide in her palm. Engraved on the back in her father's careful script, Wahrheit Nord, Truth North. Papa had given it to her on her 18th birthday, 1938, before the world had gone completely mad. And in her shirt pocket against her heart, an unopened letter. It had arrived yesterday. Red Cross envelope. Postmarked Munich, February 1945. 3 months to reach her. She hadn't opened it yet, couldn't bear to. The last letter back in December had told her things she couldn't forget. Mother losing weight, father looking skeletal, food scarce. This letter might tell her they were dead. Boots on gravel, heavy confident steps. Sergeant Nathaniel Thornton crossed the garden toward her, red hair bright in Louisiana sun, 6 feet 3 inches of well-fed American strength, moving with the easy confidence of a man who'd never known real hunger. 32 years old. Nebraska farm boy who spoke German like he'd been born in Munich, who'd spent 8 months treating enemy prisoners with a decency that had shattered everything Greta thought she knew about the world. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to maintain the professional distance the camp required. "You'll go home in 2 months, Brenner." His voice was gentle. He'd learned over these months that gentleness could be its own kind of strength. Greta looked up at him. Even after 8 months, the size difference still caught her off guard sometimes. He towered over her, not cruelly, just factually, like a grown oak tree towers over a sapling. She'd lost 20 pounds during the war in North Africa. He looked like he'd never missed a meal in his life. "Home," she said. The word tasted strange, foreign. What does that mean anymore? Where even is home. Munich is rubble. My parents are starving if they're alive at all. The house I grew up in doesn't exist. The country I knew is gone. I don't even know who I am anymore, Sergeant. Am I the girl who believed everything they taught me? Am I the prisoner who learned it was all lies? Am I German? Am I just someone who helped evil happen by filing weather reports and never asking questions? She didn't say any of this out loud. Just stood there, dirt under her nails, gloves in one pocket, compass in the other, unopened letter against her heart. "Home," she repeated. "Yes, Sergeant." Thornton watched her for a long moment. 8 months of supervising her work in the administration building. 8 months of watching a true believer's certainty crack and crumble and finally shatter. He knew what she wasn't saying. Could read it in the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was bracing for a blow that might never come. "The war's over, Brenner. You survived. That matters. Does it? She asked it quietly, genuinely. Not rhetoric, a real question. Does it matter that I survived when millions didn't? Does it matter that I ate roast beef and mashed potatoes while my mother starved? Does it matter that the enemy treated me better than my own government treated its people? Thornton didn't answer. Some questions couldn't be answered, only lived with. He turned and walked back toward the headquarters building, leaving Greta alone in the garden, surrounded by celebrating Americans and grieving Germans carrying wool gloves in May heat, for reasons she couldn't fully name. She pressed her thumb against the compass through the fabric of her pocket. Truth north. If only she knew which direction that was anymore. 8 months earlier, September 1944. To understand how Margareta Brenner ended up in a Louisiana prison camp carrying a dead man's gloves and her father's compass, you have to go back before Camp Rustin, before America, before she learned that everything she'd been taught was propaganda and lies, back to when she still believed. Munich, 1932. Greta was 12 years old when Adolf Hitler came to power. 12 years old when the textbooks changed. When her father, a schoolteacher with a careful mind and a careful soul, began teaching the new curriculum because teachers who didn't lost their jobs and jobs were scarce in Depression Germany. 12 years old when the youth rallies started. When the songs taught racial superiority like they were teaching arithmetic. When the posters showed strong Aryan workers building a glorious future while lesser races cowered in shadows. She absorbed it all. How could she not 12 to 24? Her entire adolescence and young adulthood shaped by one ideology, one worldview, one set of assumptions about how the world worked and who mattered and who didn't. By 1942, when she volunteered as a radio operator for the Luftwaffe, she believed absolutely. Believed Germany was superior, believed the Führer was leading them to greatness, believed the enemies were weak, degenerate, inferior in every way that mattered. The propaganda about Americans was specific, detailed, consistent. Americans were racially mixed mongrels, no pure bloodlines, no strength of character, soft people who'd grown weak on luxury and excess. They couldn't fight man to man, had to rely on machines in superior numbers because individually they were cowards. They were starving because Britain hoarded all the resources. Their soldiers were thin and desperate and badly trained. Greta believed every word. Why wouldn't she? She'd never met an American, never seen America, had no information except what the government provided. And the government was very, very sure about American weakness. She filed weather reports in North Africa, encoded atmospheric data, transmitted wind speeds and barometric pressure to Luftwaffe commands so they could plan flight operations. Important work, technical work. Work that required clearance and trust and absolute loyalty. She never asked what the flights were for, never questioned the orders, just did her job day after day, believing she was serving something greater than herself. Until the morning the Allied forces overran their communication station. She remembered surprisingly little about the actual capture. Chaos, shouting, the smell of explosives and dust, her supervisor burning documents while she smashed radio equipment with a hammer, following protocol, trying to destroy anything useful before the enemy arrived. Then British soldiers pouring through the door, rifles raised, shouting in English she barely understood. Hands up, on the ground, don't move. She'd expected to be shot. The propaganda said the Allies executed prisoners, especially women who'd served in military communications. Instead, they zip-tied her wrists, searched her for weapons, and loaded her onto a truck with 18 other German women from surrounding stations. The truck drove for 3 hours. Nobody spoke. Fear had stolen language. They ended up in a British processing camp in Casablanca. Tents and barbed wire and guards with rifles, they were photographed, fingerprinted, examined by military doctors who were professional and distant and made notes on clipboards, then loaded onto a transport ship bound for America. 3 weeks at sea, 19 women in a converted cargo hold below deck. The ship rolled and pitched through September storms. Most of them were sick the entire voyage. The smell was terrible. Fear and vomit and unwashed bodies in close quarters. Greta spent most of the crossing pressed against the hull, feeling the vibration of the engines, thinking about her parents. She'd written them a letter the week before capture. Cheerful lies about warm weather and good food and important work. The letter was probably still in the mail system. Would probably never arrive. They'd just stop hearing from her. Would assume she'd been killed. Would grieve without ever knowing the truth. Her mother's last letter sat memorized in Greta's mind. Written in April, arrived in June. Your father is working extra shifts at the school to qualify for additional ration points. We're managing. Don't worry about us. Focus on your duty. We're proud of you. Managing. That careful word that meant they were hungry but didn't want her to know. The British guards brought food twice a day, bread and soup. Not much, but more than Greta had expected. The propaganda said prisoners starved. But here she was not starving. Small crack in the certainty. Barely noticeable. Easy to explain away. They're British, not American. Different rules. Wait until we reach America, then we'll see the truth. The ship docked at Norfolk, Virginia on September 10, 1944. Greta climbed the ladder from the cargo hold into brilliant morning sunlight. She blinked eyes, adjusting after 3 weeks of dim, artificial light. Took her first breath of American air. Salt and diesel and something else. Something she couldn't identify at first. Absence. No smell of burning. No smell of rubble dust. No smell of a nation at war. Norfolk Harbor stretched before her, and Greta's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Ships. Dozens of ships. Massive merchant vessels and naval craft and fishing boats and yachts. More ships than she'd ever seen in one place. More metal, more paint, more visible wealth than seemed possible for a nation supposedly on the edge of starvation. The skyline beyond, buildings intact. Tall buildings with glass windows that caught the sun. No bomb damage, no ruins, no gaps where structures had been. The propaganda said America was being bombed by German submarines. Said their coastal cities were devastated. Said they were desperate and afraid, but Norfolk looked prosperous, busy, normal. Greta stood on the deck, hands still zip-tied in front of her, and felt the first real tremor of doubt. Sarah Klein stood beside her. 31, communications officer who'd worked in Tripoli, the oldest of the 19 women, sharp-eyed and skeptical even before capture. It's propaganda, Sarah whispered. For us. They're showing us their best areas, making it look better than it is. Classic psychological warfare. Greta nodded. That made sense. That explained it. They were loaded into trucks, drove through Norfolk, every block perfect, every building intact. People on sidewalks looking well-fed and unconcerned. Just the nice parts, Greta told herself. They're carefully routing us through the nice parts. Then they reached the train station. Greta had expected a prison train. Barred windows, armed guards, locked cars. Instead, they boarded a regular passenger train. Old but functional. Seats with padding, windows that opened, a bathroom at the end of each car. 2 guards per car, rifles slung casually over shoulders, looking bored rather than menacing. The train pulled out, heading west. For 4 days, Greta watched America pass outside her window. And slowly, inexorably, everything she'd been taught began to unravel. Day 1. Virginia into Tennessee. Rolling hills covered in trees showing early autumn color. Farms with barns that looked full, cattle fat and healthy in pastures. Small towns where children played in streets without fear. No bomb shelters, no rubble, no signs of shortage or suffering. At a water stop, Greta saw a woman on the platform eating an apple. A whole apple. Not a core someone else had discarded. Not carefully rationed. Just eating an apple like it was normal. Like food was abundant enough that you could eat fruit in public without anyone caring. Day 2. Tennessee into Arkansas. More farms, more full barns, more towns with lights burning at night. Lights at night. No blackout curtains, no air raid precautions, just lights blazing freely visible for miles. Germany had been under blackout since 1939. 5 years of darkness after sunset. 5 years of stumbling home in the dark, of reading by candlelight if you could get candles, of living in fear that any light would draw bombers. But here in America, supposedly at war, supposedly desperate, supposedly on the edge of collapse, the lights burned all night. Maria Fisher started crying on the second night. 26, quiet woman who'd worked meteorology in Tunisia. She pressed her face against the window and cried silently, watching American lights pass. Sarah Klein said nothing, just stared. Her theory about propaganda tours was getting harder to maintain. They'd been traveling 2 days now. Hundreds of miles, every mile identical. Abundance, safety, normalcy. If this was propaganda, it was the most elaborate propaganda operation in history. Day 3, Arkansas into Louisiana. The landscape changed. Pine forests, humid air, a richness to the vegetation that felt almost obscene. Germany had been strip mining its forests for fuel. Here, trees grew so thick you couldn't see through them. Greta thought about her father's last letter, the one that had arrived in June, written in April. We're burning furniture for heat now. The coal ration doesn't cover full winter. Your mother jokes that at least the house is getting more spacious. Jokes. Her mother was joking about burning furniture because they had no fuel. And here America had so many trees they didn't even cut them all. Just let them grow wild and thick and green like resources were infinite. Day 4, deep Louisiana. Swampland and moss-covered trees and heat that wrapped around you like a wet blanket. The train slowed. Helen Richter, 28 cipher specialist, hard-edged and bitter even before capture, spoke for the first time in days. I don't understand, she said flatly. I don't understand any of this. They said America was weak, starving, desperate, but this... She gestured at the window, at the endless green abundance. This is not a weak country. This is not a starving country. This is not even a country that knows what war means. No one answered her. What could they say? The propaganda had been wrong, catastrophically, fundamentally, obviously wrong, which meant everything else might be wrong too. The train slowed further. Through the window, Greta saw guard towers, barbed wire fences, wooden barracks arranged in neat rows, a sign partially visible through pine trees. Camp Ruston. They'd arrived. The train stopped at a small platform inside the camp perimeter. The door opened. Humid Louisiana air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine sap and turned earth and something cooking in the distance. A voice called from the platform in German, accented but clear. Exit the train in single file. Bring your belongings. No running, no talking. Follow instructions. Greta stood, picked up the small canvas bag that held everything she owned. One change of clothes, a toothbrush, a comb. Father's compass wrapped in a handkerchief. She walked to the door, descended the steps carefully. Her legs were shaky from 4 days of sitting. When she reached the platform, she looked up. 6 men stood in formation, American Army uniforms pressed and clean, boots polished, rifles held at rest. But it was their physical presence that stopped Greta's breath. They were enormous, not just tall, though they were all over 6 feet, but broad-shouldered, thick-armed, carrying weight that looked like strength rather than fat. Their faces were tanned and healthy, their movements confident and relaxed. The man at the center, the one who'd spoken German, was the largest. Red hair cut military short, square jaw, forearms like fence posts, hands that looked capable of crushing stone. He had to be 6'3" at least, easily 215 pounds, all of it muscle and bone and well-fed strength. Greta was 5'5", 112 pounds after losing 20 pounds to war rations. She felt standing in front of this man like a child, like a starving waif who'd wandered into a land of giants. Behind her, Sarah Klein whispered in German, quiet enough that only those nearby could hear. They're bigger than we expected. 5 words, simple observation, statement of fact. But those 5 words cracked something open in Greta's mind that would never fully close again. They're bigger than we expected. The propaganda had shown weak Americans, small, cowardly soldiers who couldn't fight man to man, who depended on technology because they lacked German strength and discipline. But these men didn't look weak. They looked like they could break German soldiers in half without breathing hard. The red-haired sergeant stepped forward, looked down at Greta from his significant height. "Name," he asked in German. "Brenner. Margareta Brenner." He marked something on a clipboard. Greta glimpsed a photograph clipped to it face down, just the edge visible. A child's face, maybe. She couldn't tell. "Barracks 4, the sergeant said. "Follow Corporal Henderson." Another guard, this one dark-haired, equally large, gestured for a group of 5 women to follow him. Greta was among them. They walked across the compound in late afternoon heat. Guards flanked them but didn't touch, didn't threaten. Just walked alongside with casual confidence. The confidence of men who didn't need to prove anything because their strength was self-evident. Every German soldier Greta had seen in the past year had looked thin, exhausted. Running on adrenaline and ideology and very little food, they'd moved with tension, with hunger, with the desperate energy of men losing a war they'd been promised they'd win. These Americans moved like they'd just eaten full meals, like they'd slept 8 hours, like they could fight a war and maintain peace of mind at the same time. Barracks 4 was a wooden structure with screen windows and a pot-bellied stove, 20 bunks along the walls, thin mattresses but clean blankets. A bathroom at the end with 3 sinks, 2 toilets, and a shower that actually worked. Corporal Henderson showed them around with efficient gestures. His German was worse than the sergeant's, but he supplemented with pointing. Beds first come, first served. Bathroom shared. Lights out 2200. Wake up 0600. Mess hall opens 0630. He positioned himself near the door and waited while the women claimed bunks and unpacked their meager belongings. Greta chose a bunk near the window, sat on the edge testing the mattress, thin but clean. Better than she'd expected, better than she'd slept on in North Africa. She watched Henderson through lowered lashes. He was young, maybe 25, with broad shoulders and hands that dwarfed the clipboard he held. But what struck her most was his posture. He stood relaxed weight on one leg, expression neutral. Not menacing, not even particularly interested. Just present, doing a job. The propaganda had prepared her for cruelty, for leering looks and threats and violence, for guards who'd take advantage of vulnerable women prisoners. But Henderson just stood there, occasionally made notes, waited for them to settle. After 30 minutes, he spoke again. "Dinner in 1 hour. Formation outside the barracks. Someone will escort you." Then he left, just walked out. The door closed behind him. No lock turned, no bar dropped into place. They weren't locked in. The women sat in stunned silence for several moments. Finally, Sarah Klein stood and walked to the door, opened it slowly, looked outside. "There's a guard," she reported, "about 30 feet away. But he's not even watching us, just standing there." Helen Richter's voice was sharp. "Test it, walk out, see what happens." Sarah hesitated, then stepped onto the small porch that fronted the barracks. The guard, another large American, glanced at her, didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Sarah stood there for a moment, then came back inside. "Nothing," she said, "he just looked at me. Didn't do anything." "They're waiting," Helen said darkly. "Building false security. Then they'll strike." But Greta wasn't sure. She thought about Henderson's bored expression, the sergeant's professional efficiency, the casual confidence all the guards displayed. These weren't men preparing to abuse prisoners. These were men who'd already won and knew it. Dinner formation happened at 1800 hours. A different guard, older, gray-haired, just as physically imposing, lined them up outside the barracks and marched them to the mess hall with no words and no drama. The mess hall was a large wooden building with long tables and benches. American soldiers ate at half the tables. German prisoners, all male, maybe 200 of them, occupied the other half. The women were directed to a separate section near the kitchen. Greta joined the serving line, took a metal tray, moved past steam tables where cooks, American cooks, not prisoners, loaded her plate. What they put on her plate made her stop breathing. Mashed potatoes, a lake of white starch steam rising, gravy, brown and thick, pooling in the potatoes. Roast beef, an actual slice of beef, tender and pink in the middle, Green beans, a pile of them more than a garnish. Bread with butter, real butter, not margarine. A whole pat of it. Coffee, black and hot. Apple pie, a slice of actual pie with a crust that looked flaky and golden. Greta stared at the tray, unable to process, unable to comprehend. This was more food than she'd seen in a single meal in 3 years. Maybe more. In Germany, they'd been on strict rationing since 1939. Toward the end, before capture, she'd been eating watery soup and black bread. Lucky to get meat once a week. This was abundance on a scale that seemed criminal. She sat at a table with Sarah and Maria and 4 other women. They all stared at their trays, silent, overwhelmed. Finally, Sarah picked up her fork, took a bite of potato. Her eyes closed. Tears started falling. "It's real," she whispered. "God help us. It's real." Greta ate slowly, methodically, trying not to cry. The beef was tender, seasoned with salt and pepper and something else she couldn't identify. The potatoes were creamy, the butter was fresh, the apple was crisp and sweet. Each bite confirmed what her eyes had been telling her since Norfolk. America wasn't suffering. America wasn't starving. America had been feeding its citizens and its soldiers, and now even its enemies, with food that surpassed anything Germany had managed even in peacetime. At the next table, male German prisoners ate in similar stunned silence. One of them, a thin man with hollow cheeks, held his piece of bread like it was holy, turning it over and over, unable to believe it was his. Across the mess hall, American soldiers ate the same food, talking and laughing, paying no attention to the prisoners. To them, this meal was normal, unremarkable, just dinner. "How did we lose to these people?" Maria asked quietly. It was the question everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to speak aloud, because the answer was becoming horrifyingly clear. They'd lost because they'd been fighting an enemy with unlimited resources, vast industrial capacity, enough food to feed armies and prisoners alike without strain. Germany had been starving since 1943. America was serving roast beef to enemy captives. The disparity was so enormous it redefined everything. Greta finished her meal, put her fork down, felt the weight of food in her stomach, more food than she'd eaten in a single sitting in years, and thought about her mother's letter. "We're managing, eating potatoes and cabbage if we're lucky." Her mother was eating potatoes and cabbage if she was lucky. Greta had just eaten roast beef and apple pie. The enemy was feeding her better than her own government had fed her family. That night, lying in her bunk listening to the other women breathe in the darkness, Greta pulled her father's compass from under her pillow, held it in both hands. Wahrheit Nord, truth north. But which direction was truth anymore? Everything she'd believed was lies. Everything she'd been taught was propaganda. The enemy wasn't weak, wasn't inferior, wasn't even cruel. They were just strong, unbelievably, impossibly strong, and that strength terrified her more than any cruelty could have. Because if they were this strong, this capable, this abundant, then Germany had never stood a chance. The war had been lost before it started. Every death had been pointless. Every sacrifice had been for nothing. She'd helped them, filed their weather reports, encoded their data, been a cog in their machine. For what? For a lie. For a government that fed her propaganda while her parents starved. Greta closed her eyes, pressed the compass against her forehead, and whispered into the darkness a question she didn't know how to answer. Who am I now? Outside, Louisiana night sang with insects and distant thunder. Inside, 19 German women tried to sleep in clean bunks with full stomachs, struggling to process the end of everything they'd thought they knew about the world. Tomorrow, Greta would report for work assignment, would be assigned to the administration building, would meet Sergeant Nathaniel Thornton properly for the first time, would begin the slow, painful, necessary work of rebuilding herself from the ruins of everything she'd believed. But tonight she just held her father's compass and wondered which direction led home, when home had become a concept without meaning. The war wasn't over yet, not for Germany, not officially, but for Margaret Brenner, age 24, radio operator, true believer, The war was already lost. Lost the moment she saw 6 American guards on a Louisiana platform and whispered 5 words that would haunt her for the rest of her life. They're bigger than we expected. September became October. October settled into routine. Greta learned the rhythm of Camp Ruston like learning a new language. Wake at 0600 to a bell that clanged across the compound, harsh and metallic in the pre-dawn darkness. Roll call at 06:15:19, women lined up outside Barracks 4 while a guard checked names off a clipboard. Breakfast at 06:30, work assignments at 0700. She'd expected hard labor, breaking rocks or digging ditches or some other punishment disguised as productivity. The propaganda had been clear about how America treated prisoners. Brutality, exploitation, cruelty masquerading as justice. Instead, on her third morning, Corporal Henderson walked her to the administration building and introduced her to her new supervisor. Sergeant Nathaniel Thornton looked up from a desk covered in file folders. Same red hair she remembered from the platform, same impossible size. But up close in morning light filtering through windows, she noticed details she'd missed before. Crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, not from age, from squinting into Nebraska sun across wheat fields that stretched to horizons. Calluses on his hands, thick earned calluses from years of farm work before the army. A weariness in his posture when he thought no one was watching. Like he was carrying weight that never got lighter. "Brenner," he said in German. "You'll be organizing personnel files." He gestured to a wall of filing cabinets. "Alphabetically by last name. Each file needs checking for completeness. Identification, capture report, medical examination, work assignment. If anything's missing, flag it with this form." He demonstrated once, efficiently, then left her to work. The office was quiet, just the sound of Thornton's pen scratching across reports at his desk, the occasional rustle of paper, the tick of a wall clock marking seconds. Greta opened the first filing cabinet, pulled the first folder. Prisoner 4287, Klaus Becker, age 29, captured Tunisia, March 1943. Infantry, farm laborer before conscription. She read through the file. Checked for missing documents, found everything in order, filed it properly, pulled the next folder. Prisoner 4288, Wilhelm Adler, age 23, captured Sicily, July 1943, Panzer Division, university student before conscription. Notes from his intake interview caught her eye. Quote from prisoner extremely surprised at food quality and quantity, states that American rations exceed anything available to German forces even in peacetime. She read it twice, filed the folder, pulled another, prisoner 4289 notes. Subject expressed disbelief at seeing fresh fruit in mess hall, asked if it was a special occasion, informed it was standard daily provision. Another, prisoner 4290 notes. Prisoner reported shock at guards' physical size and health, asked how Americans could be so well fed during wartime. No answer provided. Another, and another, and another, hundreds of files, thousands eventually, all captured across North Africa and Italy and southern France, all now held in camps scattered across America, and in file after file after file the same theme. German prisoners confronting the reality that everything they'd been told about American weakness was propaganda. Greta worked through the morning, read story after story of soldiers who'd believed the same lies she'd believed, who'd been equally shocked by abundance, who'd asked the same questions she was asking. How can they be so strong? How can they have so much? How did we ever think we could win? At noon, Thornton ate at his desk, sandwich that looked small in his enormous hands, coffee from a mug that could have held half a liter. Greta had brought her lunch back from breakfast, bread and cheese and an apple. She ate at the small desk Thornton had assigned her, trying to be invisible. "You have questions," Thornton said without looking up. Greta froze. "Sir, I've been doing this for 2 years. I know when prisoners have questions. Ask them." She hesitated. The propaganda had taught her that showing weakness to enemies invited exploitation. But Thornton didn't feel like an enemy, felt more like a teacher waiting patiently for a student to admit confusion. How are you all so healthy? The words came out quieter than she'd intended. You're at war. Your country should be rationing, should be struggling. But all of you are, she struggled for the right word in German, so big, so well fed, like the war isn't even touching you. Thornton finished his sandwich, took a drink of coffee, looked at her directly. Because America produces more food than we can eat. Because our farms cover areas larger than most European countries. Because even at war we have surplus. But the propaganda said propaganda is lies designed to make you feel superior. Thornton interrupted. Your government told you Americans were weak because they needed you to believe it. If you'd known the truth that America can field millions of well-fed, well-equipped soldiers while still feeding prisoners roast beef, you might have questioned whether winning was possible. Greta felt something crack inside her, a fault line in bedrock that had seemed solid her entire life. We never had a chance, did we? Thornton was silent for a moment. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a mockingbird ran through its repertoire of stolen songs. No, he said finally. You didn't. Not against this. He gestured vaguely toward the window, toward America beyond, toward farms and factories and a productive capacity that Germany couldn't match in 100 years. But that doesn't make you less human, he continued. Doesn't mean you don't deserve decent treatment. You're just people who got caught up in something bigger than yourselves. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in months, and it came from a man who had every reason to hate her. November arrived with cooler weather. Not Nebraska cold, Thornton mentioned one afternoon. Nebraska cold would kill these pine trees, but cool enough that the mornings had bite. Greta fell into the work, filing, organizing, checking records for completeness. It was mindless in a way that felt almost meditative. Her hands knew what to do. Her mind could drift. She thought about her parents a lot, wondered if they'd received notification of her capture, wondered if they thought she was dead, wondered if they were still alive themselves. Letters were allowed once a month, heavily censored. She'd written in late September carefully neutral sentences about being safe and healthy and hoping they were well. The letter had been reviewed by Thornton, stamped by the camp commander, and sent through Red Cross channels. No way to know if it would ever arrive. No way to know if they'd be able to respond. So she worked and waited and tried not to think too hard about the gulf between her full stomach and their likely hunger. One afternoon in mid-November, Thornton brought 2 mugs to her desk. Set one in front of her. Hot chocolate, he said. Corporal Henderson's mother sent him a care package. He's sharing. Greta stared at the mug. Steam rose, carrying the smell of cocoa and sugar and milk. Smell of childhood. Smell of Christmas mornings before the war. Smell she hadn't experienced in 3 years. She picked it up carefully, sipped. The heat and sweetness hit her tongue and her eyes immediately filled with tears. Thank you, she managed. Thornton settled back at his desk with his own mug, didn't comment on her tears, just drank his chocolate and returned to his paperwork. After a while, he started talking. Not to her specifically, just talking the way lonely people sometimes do, filling silence with memory. My family's farm is outside McCook, he said. Southwest Nebraska. Wheat country. Fields so flat you can see weather coming from 20 miles away. Summers hot enough to bake bread on the tractor hood. Winters cold enough to freeze diesel fuel solid. He paused. Drank chocolate. We'd harvest in July. Whole family out in the fields, my father driving the combine. My brother Isaac and me hauling grain to the elevator, my mother and sister cooking for the crews. 16-hour days, dust in everything, wheat chaff in your hair and down your shirt and in your boots. Another pause, longer this time. We'd harvest more wheat in one day than Munich probably sees in a month. Load it onto trucks, ship it to grain elevators the size of cathedrals, and that was just our farm, just one farm. There are thousands like it across Nebraska, hundreds of thousands across America. He looked at Greta then, really looked at her. Your government told you America was weak. But we're not weak. We're just so abundant we can't even comprehend scarcity the way you've lived it. We waste more food than most countries produce. Greta held her hot chocolate with both hands, let the warmth seep into her palms. She wanted to argue, wanted to defend Germany somehow. But what defense was there? The evidence surrounded her, in every meal, in every well-fed guard, in every file she read detailing German prisoners shocked by abundance. My father is a teacher, she said quietly. Was a teacher. I don't know if he still is, if he's even alive. He taught me that Germany was special, superior, destined for greatness. Thornton nodded, didn't interrupt. He wasn't lying, she continued. He believed it. We all believed it. How could we not? It was in the textbooks, in the newspapers, on the radio. From the time I was 12 years old, every source of information told me the same thing. Germany first, Germany strongest, Germany right. She looked down at her chocolate, at the small luxury that represented abundance beyond her previous comprehension. It's hard, she said, to realize your entire worldview was built on lies. Thornton was quiet for a long moment. Then my wife died in childbirth. 1942. Greta looked up, startled by the sudden shift. Her name was Abigail. Thornton continued. We'd been married 3 years. Good years. Happy years. She got pregnant. We were excited, planned the nursery, picked names, argued about whether to raise the baby in town or on the farm. His voice stayed level, controlled, but Greta could hear the effort it took. Labor went wrong. Baby came breech. Rural Nebraska hospital. Not enough doctors, not enough equipment. I sat in the waiting room for 14 hours while they tried to save them both. He paused, set down his mug. My son Caleb was born alive, but his lungs never developed right. Couldn't breathe properly on his own. They kept him in an oxygen tent. I held him when they'd let me. He lived 6 months, half a year of watching him struggle for every breath. Then one morning in March, he just stopped. I'm sorry, Greta whispered. Abigail died 2 weeks later, complications from the birth. Her body never recovered. I buried them together, her holding him, like she was still protecting him. Thornton's hands gripped the desk edge. I joined the army a week after the second funeral. Couldn't stay on the farm. Too many memories. Too much emptiness. Figured I'd throw myself into the war. Maybe find purpose in service. Maybe get killed and stop hurting. He paused. Instead, they made me a prison camp supervisor. Sent me to Louisiana to manage enemy prisoners. And you know what I learned? Greta shook her head. War takes different things from different people. Took my wife and son. Took your certainty. Took millions of lives across Europe and Africa and Asia. But it can't take everything. Can't take our choice about how we respond. I could hate every German prisoner who walks through that gate. Could blame you all for extending a war that kept me deployed when I should have been home. Should have been with Abigail. Should have driven her to a better hospital. Could have, should have, would have. But Caleb wouldn't want that. He was innocent. He never hurt anyone. And you're innocent of the worst things your government did. You didn't know. You're guilty of not asking questions, of going along, of being part of a system. But you're not guilty of murder. He stood, picked up both empty mugs. Brakes over, Brenner. Back to work. But as he walked back to his desk, Greta understood something profound had just happened. Thornton had shared his pain, his loss, his deliberate choice to remain human in a situation that invited dehumanization. And in doing so, he'd shown her that transformation was possible. That you could survive the collapse of everything you believed and rebuild yourself into something different. Something maybe better. The letter arrived on December 3rd. Greta was filing records when Thornton called her to his desk. Mail, he said, Red Cross delivery. He handed her an envelope. Her mother's handwriting. Unmistakable. Careful script that hadn't changed since Greta was a child. Postmarked Munich, July 15, 1944. Nearly 5 months to reach her. Her hands shook as she took it. You can read it here if you want, Thornton said gently. Or take it back to the barracks. Your choice. Greta sat at her desk, opened the envelope carefully, unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. My dearest Greta, we received notification of your capture in August. Thank God you're alive. We'd feared the worst. Your father and I are managing as well as can be expected. Munich was bombed again in June. Our neighborhood was hit. The house took damage to the roof and one wall, but it's still standing. We've moved into the cellar for safety. Food remains scarce. Ration points don't stretch far. Your father has lost considerable weight. He jokes that at least his old suits fit again. I've lost weight too. Perhaps 40 pounds since you left. We eat what we can find, turnip soup mostly, potato if we're lucky, bread when available. The school where your father teaches was damaged in the bombing. Classes continue in the church basement. He works extra shifts qualifying for additional ration points. We're managing. Don't worry about us. Focus on staying safe. We pray for you every night. We love you. Come home when you can. Your loving Mutti. Greta read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and sat very still, trying not to scream. Her mother had lost 40 pounds. Her father was skeletal. They were eating turnip soup twice a week if lucky. And she'd just eaten ham and eggs for breakfast. Was sitting in a heated office. Had drunk hot chocolate the day before like it was normal. The guilt was crushing. Thornton appeared beside her desk, set something down, walked away without speaking. Greta looked down. Wool gloves, thick Nebraska winter gloves, far too large for her hands. A note underneath in Thornton's handwriting. Nebraska winters are cold, Louisiana winters aren't, but you'll need these someday. Keep them. She picked up the gloves, heavy, well-made, warm. Why, she asked the empty office. Thornton was back at his desk, didn't look up. Because everyone deserves basic kindness, he said. Even prisoners, even enemies, especially people whose parents are starving while they eat our food and feel guilty about surviving. Greta pressed the gloves against her face and cried slantly. Mid-December brought the discovery that would crack her open completely. Thornton asked her to file a box of classified reports that had been declassified for prisoner records. Routine paperwork. She didn't think twice about it. Until she opened the first folder. Photographs. Black and white images of places that couldn't be real. That had to be propaganda. That couldn't possibly exist. Barbed wire, watchtowers, emaciated bodies stacked like firewood, living skeletons in striped uniforms, mass graves, gas chambers, medical experiment documentation, Auschwitz, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, names that would become synonymous with evil, numbers that made her mind refuse to process them. Millions, not thousands, millions murdered in systematic industrial-scale genocide. Greta made it to the bathroom before vomiting. She knelt on tile floor heaving while her entire understanding of reality shattered. The propaganda had said nothing about this, had mentioned camps for political prisoners and criminals, had never hinted at extermination, at mass murder, at mechanized death on a scale so vast it redefined evil. Thornton found her 20 minutes later still on the bathroom floor, shaking. "Did you know?" he asked quietly. "No." The word came out broken. I swear I didn't know. I just filed weather reports. I just did my job. I never asked questions. I never thought most people didn't know." Thornton interrupted, or didn't want to know. "There's a difference, but it's smaller than you think." He offered his hand, helped her stand. "Come to my office." She followed numbly. He sat her in the chair across from his desk, poured water from a pitcher, handed her the glass. She drank, couldn't taste it. "I need you to understand something," Thornton said. "Your file has been reviewed multiple times by camp intelligence, by War Department officials, by people whose job is to identify war criminals." Greta's breath stopped. "You're not a war criminal," Thornton continued. "You were a low-level radio operator, meteorological communications, no evidence of direct participation in combat operations or atrocities, no evidence you knew what you were supporting." "But I helped," Greta whispered. "I was part of the machine. I filed their reports. I encoded their data. I made their operations possible." "You were a cog in a machine," Thornton agreed. "One of millions. That doesn't absolve you completely, but it doesn't make you a murderer either." He paused, opened his desk drawer, pulled out a photograph, set it face up on the desk, an infant, maybe 6 months old, light hair like spun gold, lying on a blanket in dappled sunlight, eyes closed, peaceful, almost like sleeping. "That's Caleb," Thornton said, "my son. That photo was taken 2 days before he died." Greta stared at the tiny face, so fragile, so innocent. I keep it face down usually, Thornton continued. Too hard to look at, but today you need to see it. Need to understand something. He picked up the photo, looked at it for a long moment. I could hate every German. Could blame you all for a war that kept me away when Abigail needed me, when Caleb needed me. Could spend the rest of my life bitter and angry and looking for someone to punish. He set the photo down gently. But Caleb wouldn't want that. He was innocent. Never hurt anyone, never chose to be sick, just a baby who drew breath as best he could until he couldn't anymore. And you're like him in a way, innocent of the worst things. You didn't choose to be born in Nazi Germany, didn't choose the propaganda, didn't choose the regime, just did what you thought was right with the information you had. Why are you telling me this? Greta asked. Because you need to understand the difference between complicity and evil. You're complicit. You participated in a regime that did unspeakable things. But you're not evil. You're just a person who believed lies and is now confronting truth. He picked up Caleb's photo again, held it for a moment, then put it back in the drawer face down as always. When you go home, and you will go home, you'll carry this knowledge. You'll have to live with knowing what your government did, what you unwittingly supported. That's your burden, but it doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do next. December 20th brought another crisis. Helen Richter, the bitter cipher specialist from Barracks 4, attempted escape. She'd been planning it for weeks, recruited 2 male prisoners, made a crude map of the area, waited for a moonless night and a shift change between guards. They cut through the fence after midnight, made it 3 miles into Louisiana swampland before dogs tracked them down. The camp commander wanted harsh punishment. Solitary confinement for all 3, reduced rations for everyone in their barracks, collective punishment to discourage future attempts. Thornton fought him. Greta heard about it secondhand from Sarah Klein, who heard from a guard who spoke some German. But the story was consistent. Thornton had stood in the commander's office and cited Geneva Convention regulations, argued that collective punishment violated international law, insisted that only the escapees should face consequences. The commander threatened to write him up for insubordination. Thornton had accepted the threat, said he'd stake his career on proper treatment of prisoners, that if there was another escape attempt, he'd personally take responsibility, but that punishing innocent prisoners for others' actions was wrong and he wouldn't participate. The commander had backed down. Helen got 5 days in solitary. The 2 male prisoners got the same. No one else was punished. When Greta saw Thornton the next day, he looked exhausted. "Thank you," she said quietly. He glanced up from his paperwork. "For what? For protecting us. For standing up when you didn't have to." Thornton set down his pen. Brenner. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was right, because power without principle is just tyranny, because I'm trying to be the kind of man who chooses integrity even when it's costly. You could have let them punish us. Yes, I could have, and it would have been easier. But easier isn't always right." He returned to his paperwork, clearly considering the conversation finished. But Greta understood something profound had shifted. Thornton wasn't just her supervisor, wasn't just a guard following regulations. He was a man actively choosing decency when cruelty would have been simpler, choosing principle when convenience was available, choosing to see prisoners as humans when seeing them as enemies would have required less effort. That choice mattered more than she could articulate. Christmas Eve 1944. The mess hall had been transformed. Paper chains hung from rafters made by prisoners during craft time. A small pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with paper stars and strings of popcorn. Candles burned on tables, their light soft and warm. The meal was spectacular. Turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes and gravy, green beans, cranberry sauce, rolls with butter, pumpkin pie. After dinner, the camp chaplain, a Lutheran pastor from Wisconsin who spoke fluent German, led a Christmas service. 300 people packed the mess hall. American soldiers, German prisoners, all standing together in humid Louisiana night while the chaplain spoke about hope and redemption and the possibility of peace. Then he asked them to sing. Stille Nacht, Silent Night, in German first. Greta stood between Sarah Klein and Maria Fisher holding a hymnal someone had printed in Gothic script. And when 300 voices rose together singing the same words her mother had sung to her every Christmas of her childhood, something broke open in her chest. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht. Silent night, holy night. Alles schläft, einsam wacht. All is calm, all is bright. Tears streamed down her face, down Sarah's face, down the faces of hardened soldiers who'd seen terrible things and done terrible things, and were now standing in a Louisiana mess hall singing about peace with their enemies. Greta looked across the room. Thornton stood at attention near the wall. Hands clasped behind his back, face neutral except for tears streaming down his cheeks. He saw her looking. Didn't look away, just stood there crying silently while 300 voices sang about holy nights and silent hopes, and the possibility that even in darkness light persists. After the service, as prisoners filed out, Thornton approached Greta. He held a small potted plant, a seedling maybe 6 inches tall. Oak sapling, he said. They live 300 years, longer if conditions are right. Plant this when you go home. Tend it, watch it grow. And remember that even after everything burns down, life comes back. Different maybe, but still life. Greta took the pot carefully. The sapling's leaves trembled in her shaking hands. But Thornton wasn't finished. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, the same envelope he'd given her months ago back in September. Red Cross delivered this in July. I've been holding it, waiting for the right time. Today feels right. Greta opened it with numb fingers. A photograph fell out. Her parents, taken in front of their house before the bombing, both thinner than she remembered. Her father's face gaunt, her mother's dress hanging loose on a frame that had lost too much weight. But they were smiling, and on the back in her mother's handwriting, Wir lieben dich, komm sicher nach Haus. We love you, come home safe. Greta pressed the photograph against her chest and sobbed. Thornton stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, solid and steady, while she grieved everything she'd lost and everything she'd learned and everything she'd become. When she finally quieted, he spoke again. You'll go home, Brenner. The war's almost over. Germany's collapsing. Repatriation will start soon, and when you go, you'll carry lessons with you. About strength and compassion. About how real power chooses mercy. About how the truly strong can afford to be kind. How do I live with what I know now, she asked. How do I go back knowing what we did, what I helped make possible? Same way everyone lives with their mistakes, Thornton said quietly. You acknowledge what happened. You commit to doing better. You work to build something that prevents it from happening again. That's all any of us can do. The world shifted. Greta stood in the Louisiana night oak sapling in one hand, photo of her parents in the other, wool gloves in her pocket, and felt the final walls of propaganda crumble. Voice 1. The voice that had repeated Nazi ideology for 12 years had gone silent. Voice 2, the new voice built on evidence and experience and Thornton's patient teaching, spoke clearly now. You were lied to. You believed lies. You participated in evil unknowingly. But you're not evil. You can choose differently. You can rebuild yourself. You can carry forward the lesson that strength without compassion is just brutality. The war wasn't over. Not officially. Germany was still fighting, still dying, still clinging to delusions of victory. But for Margaret Brenner, standing in a Louisiana prison camp on Christmas Eve 1944, the war was already finished. America had been bigger than expected, stronger, more abundant, more capable, more merciful than propaganda had prepared her for. And that mercy, that deliberate choice to treat enemies with dignity, had transformed her more completely than any punishment could have. Tomorrow she'd return to filing records. Next week she'd continue learning. The months ahead would bring Germany's surrender and her own reckoning with going home. But tonight, Christmas Eve, she stood under stars and held an oak seedling and understood something fundamental. Home wasn't a place anymore. Home was a direction, a choice, a commitment to carrying forward what Thornton had taught her. That strength and mercy aren't opposites. that the truly powerful can afford to be kind, that even after everything burns, life comes back. She looked up at the stars, same stars shining over Munich, over Nebraska, over battlefields and prison camps and ruined cities across the world, and whispered a promise to herself, to her parents, to the memory of everything she'd been and everything she was becoming. I'll go home. I'll plant this tree. I'll rebuild, and I'll make sure this never happens again. Behind her, the mess hall glowed with candlelight. Voices still sang. Americans and Germans together, choosing for one night to remember they were all just humans far from home, missing people they loved, hoping for peace. Greta turned and walked back inside, into warmth, into light, into transformation. The girl who'd believed propaganda was gone. The woman who'd learned truth was just beginning. May 8th, 1945. The loudspeaker announcement that had opened this story. Germany has surrendered unconditionally. Greta stood in the garden dirt under her nails, 8 months of transformation compressed into a single moment of reckoning. The wool gloves in her pocket, her father's compass pressed against her palm, the unopened letter from February that had arrived yesterday still sealed because she was afraid of what it might say. Thornton approached across the compound, boots crunching on gravel, and spoke the words that would force her to confront everything she'd been avoiding. "You'll go home in 2 months, Brenner." Now standing in the reality of that statement, Greta understood the full weight of what it meant. Home. Not to the Munich she remembered, not to the girl she'd been, but to something she couldn't even imagine yet. Rubble and grief and the enormous task of rebuilding a nation from moral and physical ruins. She didn't want to go. The truth sat in her stomach like a stone. She didn't want to leave Camp Rustin. Didn't want to leave 3 meals a day and clean water and work that felt meaningful. Didn't want to leave Thornton's patient teaching and Sarah Klein's friendship and the strange safety of being a prisoner in enemy hands. Didn't want to face what Germany had become. Around her, American soldiers celebrated. German prisoners wept, and Greta stood frozen between 2 worlds belonging fully to neither. 10 days later, Thornton called her to his office. She knew what was coming, had been dreading it since the surrender announcement. He sat behind his desk, the same desk where he'd shared hot chocolate and shown her Caleb's photograph and taught her that complicity wasn't the same as evil. But today his expression was serious, almost stern. "Sit down, Brenner." She sat. "Repatriation processing begins next week," he said. "Your file has been reviewed. Low threat classification. No war crimes, no security concerns. You'll be in the first wave of releases, home by August." "Home," she repeated numbly. Thornton watched her, those blue-green eyes that missed nothing. "You don't want to go?" It wasn't a question. Greta looked down at her hands, calloused now from garden work, stronger than when she'd arrived, fed and healthy and whole, while her parents, if they were still alive, were starving. "Here I'm safe," she said quietly. "I have food, work, purpose. I don't have to see what we did, don't have to face the ruins, don't have to admit to everyone I meet that I was part of it, that I filed their weather reports and never asked questions and helped them kill millions." Thornton's voice went hard, harder than she'd ever heard it. "You don't get to hide here, Brenner." She looked up, startled. "You don't get to stay comfortable in an American prison camp while your country rebuilds. You were part of what Germany was. Now you need to be part of what it becomes." "But I'm just one person," she protested. "What difference can I make? I can't rebuild a whole country. Can't undo what happened. Can't bring back the dead. Same difference anyone makes," Thornton said. "You can choose to be decent, to treat people well, to reject the ideology that led to this mess. One person at a time. That's how countries change." He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the compound where prisoners and guards moved through their daily routines. "I could let you stay," he continued. "Could file paperwork saying you're essential to administration. Could delay your repatriation indefinitely. Would be easy. Would let you avoid hard choices." He turned back to face her. "But I won't do it, because you need to go home. Need to face what happened. Need to rebuild not just buildings, but the moral foundation of a nation." And hiding here safe and fed and comfortable would make you complicit all over again, would make you someone who knew what needed doing and chose comfort instead. The words hit like physical blows. "You're sending me away," Greta whispered. "I'm refusing to let you hide," Thornton corrected. "There's a difference." Silence stretched between them. Outside, a mockingbird sang. Life continued indifferent to human suffering. "When I go back," Greta said slowly, "and I see the ruins, and I meet people who lost everything, and they ask me where I was, what I did, how I survived. What do I tell them?" "You tell them the truth," Thornton said, "that you were a prisoner in America, that the enemy fed you and treated you decently and sent you home to rebuild, that you learned strength doesn't require cruelty, that mercy isn't weakness, that even after everything burns, people can choose to be better. And if they hate me for surviving, then they hate you. But you keep going anyway, keep rebuilding anyway, keep choosing decency anyway. That's what it means to carry this forward." He returned to his desk, sat down, picked up his pen, dismissed Brenner. "Pack your things, say your goodbyes. 2 months goes faster than you think." Greta stood, walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the knob. "Thank you, Sergeant, for everything." Thornton didn't look up from his paperwork. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've rebuilt something worth building." July 20th, 1945, final night. Greta had said goodbye to Sarah Klein and Maria Fisher and the other women from Barracks 4. Had packed her canvas bag with the few possessions she owned, the Rilke book the Red Cross had provided at Christmas, the photograph of her parents, the oak sapling carefully wrapped for transport, and the wool gloves folded small still, carrying the smell of Nebraska winter even in Louisiana summer. She found Thornton outside the administration building smoking a cigarette, watching the sun set through pine trees. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "No." He offered her the cigarette. She took it even though she didn't smoke. Drew smoke into her lungs and coughed. Thornton smiled slightly. First time she'd seen him smile in weeks. "You'll get used to it," he said. "A lot of soldiers took up smoking during the war. Something to do with your hands when everything else feels out of control?" "Is that why you smoke, partly? Also because my brother Isaac smoked. Feels like honoring him somehow." Greta handed back the cigarette. They stood in companionable silence while Louisiana night settled around them. Humid air, insect songs, distant thunder promising rain. "I want to tell you something," Thornton said, "about Isaac, the brother who died at Normandy." Thornton had mentioned him only once before, back in December. Greta had learned not to push for details. Isaac was 28 when he died. Thornton continued. "Big guy, bigger than me even, farm strong, could throw hay bales like they weighed nothing. Had a laugh that carried across fields. He took a drag, exhaled slowly. He wrote me a letter before D-Day, just in case. All the soldiers did. Write letters just in case they don't come back, put them in their footlockers, hope they never get mailed." "Isaac's got mailed," Greta said quietly. "Yeah. Reached me in August, 2 months after he died." Thornton's voice stayed level, controlled, but the effort showed. "He wrote a lot of things, told me he loved me, told me to take care of Ma, told me the farm was mine if I wanted it." Pause. "But the last thing he wrote, I've thought about it every day since. He wrote, 'Nate, if I don't come back, don't hate them. The Germans. They're just kids who believed lies. Same as we're kids who believed our government when they said this was necessary. Don't let war make you cruel. Don't let hatred poison what comes after.'" Thornton looked at Greta directly. "I treat you well because of Isaac, because he asked me not to hate. Because even dying on a French beach, he had the wisdom to understand that enemies are just people in different uniforms." Greta felt tears burning. "Your brother sounds like he was a good man." "Best man I ever knew," Thornton said simply. "And his death was your government's fault. Your military killed him. But you personally didn't do it. You didn't fire the bullet, didn't plan the invasion, just filed weather reports and believed what you were told." He ground out his cigarette under his boot heel. "Should I hate you for that? Should I starve you? Beat you, make you suffer because your nation's choices took my brother?" What would that accomplish except making me as bad as the people we fought against? Nothing, Greta whispered. Exactly nothing. Thornton agreed. So I chose differently. Chose to honor Isaac by being the kind of man he believed I could be. Someone who treats enemies with dignity. Someone who chooses mercy when vengeance would be easier. He pulled something from his pocket, extended his hand. Your compass, he said. The one you've been carrying since capture. Greta stared. When had he taken it? She must have left it on her desk. I can't keep that, she said. It's mine. My father gave it to me. I know, Thornton said. That's why I'm giving it back, with something added. He opened his palm. The compass gleamed in fading light, but there was something else. A second inscription on the front, freshly engraved. Strength is choosing mercy. NT 1945. You taught me what true north means, Thornton said. Showed me that kindness isn't weakness, that mercy takes more strength than cruelty. Now carry it home and show others. Greta took the compass with shaking hands, ran her thumb over the new inscription. What will you remember about us? She finally managed. Thornton thought about it. That you were brave, he said. That you survived something terrible. That you faced the collapse of everything you believed and didn't break. That you let truth change you instead of clinging to comfortable lies. That's worth remembering. What should I remember about you? That we were just soldiers doing a job, Thornton said. That we tried to do it honorably. That we believed treating prisoners well wasn't weakness, it was strength. He paused. And that we were bigger than you expected, and that made all the difference. Greta laughed despite everything, the same words she'd whispered on the platform 8 months ago. They're bigger than we expected. Yes, she said. You were definitely bigger than I expected. Dawn came gray and humid. July 21st, 1945. 19 women assembled outside Barracks 4 with their small bags waiting for transport to the train station. The same journey in reverse. Louisiana to New York, shipped to Bremerhaven, then dispersal to home regions under occupation authority supervision. Guards formed a loose perimeter, not threatening, just present, guiding without force. Sergeant Nathaniel Thornton stood near the truck that would take them to the station. As each woman climbed aboard, he shook their hands, a formal gesture that felt oddly appropriate. When Greta reached him, he held her hand for a moment longer than necessary. Good luck, Brenner. Rebuild well. Thank you, Sergeant, for everything. She climbed into the truck, found a seat near the window. As the engine started and they pulled away, she watched Camp Ruston recede. The barracks, the mess hall, the administration building where she'd filed records and learned that enemies could be decent. The garden where she'd stood on May 8th and heard that the war was over. Sarah Klein sat beside her, crying quietly. I don't want to go back. Sarah whispered. I don't want to see what Germany has become. Neither do I, Greta admitted. But we don't have a choice. This is what losing means. We face it, we fix it, we make sure it never happens again. How Greta thought about Thornton's patient teaching. About hot chocolate and wool gloves and oak saplings. About choosing mercy when cruelty would be easier. By remembering what we learned here, she said. By carrying it forward. By becoming the kind of people who choose decency even when it's hard. The truck rolled through Louisiana countryside, green and lush and utterly foreign. Through the window, Greta glimpsed farms with full barns, towns with lights burning, people who looked well-fed and unconcerned. She thought about propaganda posters showing weak Americans dependent on money instead of strength. Thought about the reality. Guards like Thornton who towered over them physically and morally. Who chose kindness when cruelty would have been justified. Thought about going home to rebuild a country that had lost everything because it believed lies. And thought about carrying forward the lesson. That strength without compassion is brutality. That winning means nothing if you become monsters. That the truly strong are those who choose mercy even toward the defeated. August 1945, Munich. Greta had expected ruins, had prepared herself for destruction. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality. Block after block of rubble, Buildings reduced to hollow shells, streets impassable with debris, people living in cellars and bombed-out basements, gaunt faces and hollow eyes and bodies that had forgotten what fullness felt like. The smell was worst, dust and ash and human waste and death still buried under collapsed structures. She walked 40 kilometers, rail lines destroyed, roads cratered, carrying her canvas bag and oak sapling and compass and gloves. She found her parents' house on the third day. The roof was partially collapsed. One wall showed a gaping hole from shrapnel. The windows were gone, replaced with boards, but it was still standing, more than many could say. Her parents were living in the cellar. Greta descended concrete steps, knocked on a makeshift door cobbled together from salvaged wood. Her mother opened it. Greta barely recognized her. Skeletal. That was the only word. Her mother had lost at least 60 pounds. Her dress hung on a frame that looked like it might collapse if you touched it. Her face was all sharp angles and sunken cheeks and eyes too large for their sockets. But those eyes filled with tears when she recognized her daughter. Greta, Mutti. They held each other and cried. Her father appeared behind her mother, worse than Mutti. So thin his clothes looked like they were draped over a skeleton. His face was the face of concentration camp victims. The faces from those classified files, the faces that still haunted Greta's dreams. "You're alive," he said, voice rough. "Thank God, you're alive." The cellar was one room, dirt floor, walls seeping moisture, a small stove cobbled together from scrap metal, 2 mattresses on the floor, a table made from an old door, 3 chairs, one with a broken leg propped up with bricks. This was home now. "We're managing," Mutti said with desperate brightness. "We have food every few days. The occupation authorities are distributing rations. It's not much, but we're alive." Greta set down her bag, pulled out the bread and cheese and dried meat she'd been given for the journey. She'd barely touched it, saved it for this moment. "Here," she said, "eat." Her parents stared at the food like it was treasure. "Where did you get this?" Father asked. "American rations," Greta said. "They sent me home with supplies." Her parents ate slowly, savoring each bite, making it last. Watching them, Greta felt the full crushing weight of survivor guilt. She'd eaten roast beef while they starved, had been safe and warm and fed while they lived in a cellar and burned furniture for heat. "Tell us about America," Mutti said between bites. "Were they cruel to you?" Greta looked at her parents' skeletal faces, at the cellar they called home, at the ruins of everything they'd known, and told them the truth. "No," she said. "They weren't cruel, they fed us well, treated us with dignity. The sergeant who supervised me lost his wife and infant son, lost his brother in the war, but he chose kindness anyway, taught me that strength and mercy aren't opposites." She pulled out the oak sapling. "He gave me this, told me to plant it when I got home, as a reminder that even after everything burns, life comes back." Father looked at the sapling with exhausted eyes. "Where would we plant it? Everything is rubble." "Then we'll plant it in the rubble," Greta said, "and we'll rebuild around it. That's the lesson. That's what I learned. We face what we did, we acknowledge the horror, and then we choose to build something better." The years that followed were hard, harder than Greta had imagined possible. 1945 into 1946. Physical labor, clearing rubble brick by brick, salvaging materials that could be reused. Helping neighbors rebuild collapsed houses, cold winters with insufficient heat. Hunger that never quite went away even when occupation rations increased. But also psychological labor. Confronting what the regime had done, facing guilt and shame and complicity. Trying to build something better from complete collapse. Greta taught school, children who'd grown up in war and knew nothing else. She taught them reading and mathematics and history. Real history, not propaganda. Truth about what had happened and why it must never happen again. She spoke about Camp Rustin sometimes, about Sergeant Thornton who'd lost everything and chose kindness anyway, about American abundance that could afford mercy toward enemies, about the lesson she'd been sent home to carry forward, that strength without compassion is brutality. In 1948, she met Thomas Weber, He'd been a prisoner in England, had similar stories of unexpected kindness, of British farmers who'd hired POWs for field work and treated them like hired hands instead of enemies, of small mercies that had transformed understanding. They married in spring, small ceremony. No money for anything elaborate, but genuine joy despite scarcity. They had 3 children, raised them on stories of war as warning, taught them that their parents' generation had believed lies and paid terrible prices, that truth required constant vigilance, that mercy was strength and cruelty was weakness. The oak tree grew. Greta had planted it in what had been her family's garden. In 1945, it was a 6-inch sapling in rubble. By 1955, it was 15 feet tall. By 1965, 25 feet. She sat under it sometimes, ran her hands over bark that had grown thick and strong, remembered Thornton's words, 300 years, longer if conditions are right. The tree would outlive her children, would stand as testament to transformation when everyone who remembered the war was gone. 1965, 20 years after the war. The letter arrived in October, American postage, Nebraska return address. Greta's hands shook as she opened it. Dear Mrs. Weber, I hope this finds you well and thriving in rebuilt Germany. I often think about the women from Camp Rustin and wonder how you all fared. I hope you found the strength to rebuild both your country and your lives. I hope you planted the oak sapling and watched it grow. I hope you passed forward the lesson that even enemies can be decent, that mercy matters, that we're all just people trying to survive in circumstances beyond our control. If you're willing, I'd welcome correspondence. It would be good to know how the story turned out. Best wishes, Nathaniel Thornton, McCook, Nebraska. Greta read it 3 times, then sat down and wrote back immediately. Dear Sergeant Thornton, your letter found me well. I'm alive, married, 3 children, teaching school in Munich. The oak tree is 25 feet tall now. We sit under it every summer, and I tell my children about the American sergeant who taught their mother that strength and mercy aren't opposites. Germany has rebuilt, not perfectly. We still struggle with guilt and memory and the weight of what we did. But we're trying, choosing decency, rejecting the ideology that led to catastrophe. One person at a time, like you said. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for everything you taught me. Thank you for being bigger than I expected in every way that mattered. With deep gratitude, Margaret Weber Brenner. The correspondence continued for decades. Annual letters, holiday greetings, photographs of growing families. Thornton remarried in 1967, a widow named Eleanor with 2 grown children. Greta's children graduated university, started careers, gave her grandchildren. The letters became a thread connecting 2 people who'd been enemies and learned that enmity was smaller than humanity. 1988. Greta was 68. Thornton was 76. She flew to America for the first time as a free citizen, traveled to Nebraska, met Thornton and Eleanor at their farmhouse outside McCook. He was old now, hair white, face weathered, but still tall, still broad-shouldered, still carrying himself with the same quiet dignity she remembered. They sat on his porch drinking coffee and talked about Camp Rustin, about the war, about the strange grace of surviving. You were bigger than we expected, Greta said, echoing that first observation from 44 years earlier. Thornton laughed. And you were stronger than you knew. You survived. You rebuilt. You raised children who will never repeat those mistakes. That's everything. Did you ever regret it? Greta asked. Treating us well, protecting us. Never, Thornton said without hesitation. Isaac asked me not to hate. I honored that. And in honoring it, I became someone I could respect, someone who chose principle over convenience. He looked out at wheat fields stretching to the horizon. I think about those 8 months often, he said. About all of you. About the choice we made to treat prisoners as humans instead of enemies. About how small acts of decency can ripple forward through generations. Your children know the story they know. Eleanor's children know. My nephew's children know. It's part of our family history now. The war where Grandpa chose kindness. Greta reached into her purse, pulled out the compass, the one Thornton had returned to her with the new inscription. "I've carried this every day for 43 years, she said. "It pointed me home, pointed me toward truth. Now I want you to have it back." Thornton shook his head. "That's yours. You earned it. You gave it to me as a loan," Greta said, "to point me toward truth. I found truth. Now someone else should carry it forward." But Thornton closed her fingers around it gently. "No," he said. "Give it to your grandchildren. Let them carry it forward. The lesson doesn't end with us. It passes on, truth north. Generation after generation." The decades turned. Greta and Thornton continued writing. Their correspondence filled boxes, hundreds of letters spanning 40 years. Witnesses to transformation, to friendship built on the ruins of enmity. Thornton died in 1998, age 82, heart attack. Quick and painless, according to Eleanor's letter. His funeral was in McCook. Greta was too old to travel, but she sent a letter that Eleanor read at the service. "Nathaniel Thornton taught me that the truly strong can afford to be merciful, that strength and compassion aren't opposites but complements, that even in war, even toward enemies, decency is possible. He was bigger than I expected, physically, yes, but more importantly, morally, psychologically. He had power over me and chose kindness. Had victory and chose mercy. That choice changed my life. Changed how I raised my children, changed what I passed forward. Thank you, Sergeant, for being the man Isaac believed you could be, for honoring your brother through kindness, for showing this enemy that mercy is the highest form of strength." Greta died in 2003, age 83, peacefully in her sleep. Her children found among her possessions the Rilke book from Christmas 1944, 53 letters from Thornton, the wool gloves worn thin but still intact, the compass with both inscriptions, and a photograph of 6 American guards standing with 19 German women in front of Barracks 4. July 1945, her funeral was in Munich. Her daughter read from a letter Greta had written to Thornton in 1990. "I think often about that first moment when we saw you guards on the platform, so much larger than we'd been told to expect, so much stronger than propaganda had prepared us for. That physical disparity symbolized everything we learned in the following months. You were bigger than we expected in every way, physically, morally, psychologically. You had the power to hurt us and chose kindness. You had victory and chose mercy. That lesson shaped everything that came after. Germany rebuilt because people like me carried home the knowledge that strength doesn't require cruelty. Thank you for teaching us that. Thank you for being bigger than you needed to be." 2019. University of Texas Research Project. Graduate students discovered preserved records from Camp Ruston, guard logs, prisoner files, photographs documenting daily life in a Louisiana POW camp, among them a group photo taken July 20th, 1945, the day before repatriation. 19 German women standing in front of Barracks 4, 6 American guards behind them. The disparity was visible even in the faded photograph. The guards towered over the women, broader, healthier, carrying weight that spoke of abundant food and relative peace. But what caught historians' attention was the expressions. The guards weren't smirking or threatening. They looked professional, serious but not cruel. And the women, despite everything, looked not terrified but resigned, accepting, almost peaceful. It was a photograph of enemies who'd learned they were just people, of captors who'd chosen kindness, of prisoners who'd carried that kindness home and built new nations on its foundation. Researchers tracked down descendants, interviewed Greta's children, Thornton's nephew, read through decades of correspondence, published a book, Bigger Than Expected: Mercy and Transformation in an American POW Camp. The book won awards, was taught in universities, became part of the historical record because the story mattered, not as propaganda, not as American exceptionalism, but as evidence that even in war, even toward enemies, people could choose decency. That small acts of mercy could ripple forward through generations. That strength and compassion weren't opposites but complements. Full circle now. Back to May 8th, 1945. Greta standing in the garden, dirt under her nails, gloves in her pocket, compass in her palm. Unopened letter against her heart, Thornton walking toward her, boots on gravel. You'll go home in 2 months, Brenner. And Greta understanding finally what home meant. Not a place, not a building, not even a country. Home was a direction, a choice, a commitment to carrying forward what she'd learned. That enemies could become teachers, that cruelty was weakness and mercy was strength. That even after everything burned, life came back. Different, changed, but still life. She'd go home to ruins, would rebuild, would raise children who knew the truth, would plant an oak tree that would outlive her by centuries, would write letters to a man who'd been her enemy, and became her teacher and remained her friend for 40 years. Would carry forward the lesson until her dying day, that they were bigger than she expected, not just physically, though they were that, but bigger in every way that mattered, bigger in compassion, in mercy, in the choice to treat defeated enemies as humans rather than objects of vengeance. That choice repeated thousands of times across hundreds of camps by thousands of guards, who could have chosen cruelty but chose decency, changed the world. Not dramatically, not immediately, but quietly, persistently, one prisoner at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one broken ideology at a time. Greta looked down at the compass in her hand, Wahrheit Nord, Truth North, and below it now Thornton's inscription, Strength is choosing mercy. She'd found it in a Louisiana prison camp, in the patient teaching of a Nebraska sergeant, in roast beef dinners and hot chocolate and wool gloves that smelled of winter, in the understanding that the truly strong can afford to be merciful. She slipped the compass back into her pocket, felt the weight of it against her hip, solid, real, true. Around her, Americans celebrated and Germans wept. And Margaret Brenner stood between two worlds, carrying the seed of transformation that would grow for 300 years. The war was over. The rebuilding was just beginning. And somewhere in Nebraska, Nathaniel Thornton stood in wheat fields and thought about prisoners he'd treated with dignity and wondered if they'd carry forward what he'd tried to teach. They did, for 40 years, for 3 generations. For as long as oak trees stand and compasses point north and people remember that mercy is the highest form of strength. They're bigger than we expected. 5 words that started as simple observation became truth, became wisdom, became legacy. The truly strong can afford to be merciful, and mercy chosen deliberately in the face of every reason for cruelty changes everything. One heart at a time, one prisoner at a time, one nation at a time. Forever.